Have you finished packing? Please hurry up. We plan to renovate your room after you leave. Without offering any help, the eldest son's wife urged Edith us to hurry. She seemed ecstatic about finally making this house her own. She really doesn't know anything, does she? I glanced at my husband, who silently gestured for me to stop and smiled gently at his brother's wife. Sorry for the delay. We'll be out by tomorrow. Since there will be workers around, it's best if you and Michael stay in your room. Since we were leaving behind the shared furniture and appliances, our belongings were mostly just bedding and a few dressers. It probably wouldn't take more than 30 minutes to move everything out. The next day, the final farewell was much more straightforward than I expected. Well, we're off then. Yeah, see you. Take care. There were no words of apology or gratitude. Without even a proper send-off, Michael and Edith just glanced at us while lounging in the living room. With such an attitude from them, there was no need for us to be overly courteous either. However, as we silently got into the taxi, I couldn't help but think about the cat they were leaving behind. Could Edith take care of it properly? Would she be able to love and care for it adequately? As I watched our home fade into the distance through the taxi window, I had a sudden thought and took out my phone to call someone. In hindsight, it might have been my sixth sense kicking in. My name is Cheryl, 66 years old. My husband, John, is a year older than me, and we've been married for 35 years. We've had a very harmonious relationship without any major conflicts. John worked for a multinational company and was usually very busy, but he always made time for the family. This year, John happily retired, and I was looking forward to spending more quality time together. However, it seems I was the only one excited about his retirement, as I recently realized it was our eldest son, Robert, and his wife, Edith, who showed dissatisfaction. They've been living with us for about a year ever since they got married. The cohabitation was at Edith's request. She liked the convenience of our home being close to the station for commuting and shopping. We wanted to give the newlyweds some space, but in the end, we were persuaded to let them stay with us. Never did I imagine it would lead to this situation. What on earth are you thinking? It happened about 2 months after John retired. Returning from shopping, I was stopped in my tracks by the sound of John's angry voice in the living room. John was scolding Robert, who was sitting on the sofa. It was rare for my usually calm husband to be this furious. "What's going on?" I asked, and John turned to me with a deep sigh. Robert was rummaging through my bag and took money from my wallet. "What? He seems to be short on cash after losing big at the Kentucky Derby recently." With that, John grabbed a few bills in his wallet from Robert's hand. It was definitely John's wallet. I had given it to him on our 25th wedding anniversary, so there was no mistake. The fact that it was in Robert's hand, along with the money, was undeniable proof of what John said. "Robert, I thought you quit gambling. You promised never to do it again after that big loss last time. So why?" Whether he heard me or not, Robert continued watching TV without replying. He often ignored conversations that didn't interest him or that involved reprimands. It seemed he truly didn't hear, as he frequently forgot things told to him verbally. This time was no different. No matter how much I pleaded, it had no effect. But I had a hunch about why he had started gambling again. It had to be Edith. Robert never had an interest in gambling before. He was a typical honest office worker, never involved in any criminal activities like stealing from someone's wallet or shoplifting. If asked what had drastically changed Robert, I would undoubtedly say it was meeting his wife. Edith was a lively and energetic woman. When they were introduced, I hoped she would bring out the best in my introverted son, but at that time, I didn't know. I didn't know she was an avid gambler with a reckless approach to money. "Your mother is talking to you. How about?" Without responding, fed up with Robert's attitude, John turned off the TV. Finally, Robert spoke. "Shut up." I gave it back, "So stop whining. Why are you making such a big deal over a couple of bills?" "What?" Besides, I was shocked at how little cash was in it. "Dad, you've really fallen, haven't you?" "Well, I retired, so that's to be expected." Pathetic. With that, Robert walked out of the living room. I tried to stop him, but John held me back. It's partly my fault for leaving my bag out, and repeatedly scolding him will only backfire. But his attitude is just too much. It was horrible, too horrible. John never flaunted his role as the family's breadwinner, but it was undeniable that we lived comfortably because of him. That included Robert and Edith. Not only did they save on rent, but they always had excuses for not contributing to living expenses, which John mostly covered. Instead of showing respect, they insulted him. I couldn't help but feel anger, not only towards Robert but also towards Edith, who had reintroduced him to gambling. A few days later, still troubled, I decided to confront Edith. Robert seems to be struggling with money lately. Do you know anything about it? Oh, he lost big at the Kentucky Derby, didn't he? You knew? Yeah, I invited him to go with me. Just as I thought, Robert had started gambling again because of Edith. Why would you do that? Robert was trying to quit. Was he? I didn't know that. Please, Edith, don't invite Robert to gamble anymore. If this continues, it will cause problems for you too, won't it? We just do what we want with our own earnings, so it's not a problem. I was taken aback by her unexpected response. Indeed, both Robert and Edith worked and earned their own money, and with no worries about food, clothing, or shelter, they were free to spend it as they pleased. But you're married. You might have children someday, and for your future, we decided not to have kids. We don't want to be tied down and unable to do what we like because of child rearing. Her response shocked me once again. There was too much information to process, but in a way, it made sense. The financial needs drastically differ if you have children. That's why their money management was so lax. However, even without children, a couple should support each other. But as a couple, you should help each other in tough times. Robert is struggling right now, then why don't you help him out? You're his parents. Besides, you guys are well off. Oh, but now you're on a pension, right? But there must be some retirement savings. John's company was multinational, so there's no pension really. That's disappointing. I thought you'd have a hefty pension. No, there isn't, so please handle Robert's issues between yourselves. Honestly, supporting your living expenses is already quite a burden, and we can't afford more. Well, that's Robert's fault for losing. You can't blame me for that, but anyway, we can't help right now. Without securing any promise of support for Robert, I was practically chased out of their room. A week passed with Robert's money troubles unresolved. If he was desperate enough to steal from his parents' wallets, wasn't it a sign of real desperation? Shouldn't we help him before he turns to crime? John and I discussed it repeatedly, but he insisted, this is the result of spoiling him. Now is the time to be tough for the future. In the end, I had to agree. At least we were providing meals in the morning and evening, and he had a commuter pass. He just needed to make it to the next payday. But our brief sense of relief was shattered by an unexpected turn of events. It was a weekend night after finishing dinner. We were relaxing in the living room. Ding dong. It was unusual to have visitors at this hour, so I went to the door with some curiosity. As I opened the box, I saw a pair of eyes staring back at me. It was a cat. Isn't it cute? I found it abandoned on my way home. Edith looked pleased with herself, but I quickly remembered the gravity of the situation and called out to the living room, John, go to the bedroom and close the door immediately. I closed the box and handed it back to Edith. Edith, I'm sorry, but we can't keep a cat here. What? Why not? I explained to Edith that John had a severe cat allergy. Exposure to cat saliva caused skin inflammation, and inhaling fur or dander triggered asthma-like attacks. Once, when Robert visited a friend with a cat and came back covered in fur, John had an attack and had to be taken to the hospital. I reminded her that this allergy had been one of the conditions we discussed when she moved in. So you're saying I should take it back out there in this cold? It will die. I was at a loss for words at Edith's remark. I don't dislike cats, so telling her to put the cat back out in the cold was something I couldn't bring myself to say. but I couldn't risk John's health either. All right, the cat can stay in your room for one night, but just one night. Tomorrow, we'll contact the animal shelter to have it taken in. At least the shelter would temporarily care for the cat. Edith reluctantly agreed to my suggestion. I informed John and Robert about the arrangement, and we agreed the cat would stay in their room for the night. However, things didn't go as planned. The next morning, my eldest son and his wife changed their minds. We will keep the cat, Edith. That's not what we agreed on. But we really want to keep it. It's so cute. Why can't we? Because John is allergic. If he doesn't touch it, it'll be fine. We'll take care of it. You're both at work during the day. Who will look after it then? Can't you do it, Cheryl? I can't, and that's why I'm saying no. How heartless. I didn't know you were so cold. You can't even help a tiny cute cat. Do you know that shelters often end up euthanizing animals? You're just looking out for yourselves, ignoring any sacrifice needed. Do you know what people call folks like you? Old nuisances. What? We don't need old nuisances. If we can't keep the cat, you should leave immediately. Before I could argue, Robert continued, It's a good time for you to consider moving to a retirement home. You're old enough, and we have no intention of taking care of you. Besides, you're not earning any more. That's enough, you two. All right, John, who had been silently listening, suddenly interrupted me. He wore a mask and gloves since the previous night's incident and kept his distance from Robert and Edith. I felt sorry for making him uncomfortable in his own home. I can't keep a cat because of my allergy, so we'll go along with your suggestion and leave, John. As Robert said, it might be a good time to consider a retirement home. John looked at me. I understood his intention, so I kept quiet. To Robert and Edith, it seemed like we had given up. Their attitude became more triumphant. Don't worry about the house. We'll take good care of it. But keep all the utilities and ownership in your name. It's too much hassle to change. Retirement homes are expensive, but you need to manage that yourselves. We're not helping. Their relief and joy at our compliance were clear. This must be their true nature. Maybe Edith had planned this outcome all along by bringing the cat. We were fooled by her scheme. Over the next week, I prepared for the move, taking care of John. Robert and Edith continued to make snide remarks, but they kept the cat in their room, realizing it would be problematic if John fell ill before we left. Have you finished packing? Please hurry up. We're planning to renovate your room after you leave. Without offering any help, Edith urged us to hurry. She seemed ecstatic about finally making this house her own. She really doesn't know anything. I glanced at John, who silently gestured for me to stop and smiled gently at Edith. Sorry for the delay. We'll be out by tomorrow. Since there will be workers around, it's best if you and Robert stay in your room. Since we were leaving behind the shared furniture and appliances, our belongings were mostly just bedding and a few dressers. It probably wouldn't take more than 30 minutes to move everything out. The next day came. The final farewell was much more straightforward than I expected. Well, we're off then. Yeah, see you. Take care. There were no words of apology or gratitude. Without even a proper send-off, Robert and Edith just glanced at us while lounging in the living room. With such an attitude from them, there was no need for us to be overly courteous either. However, as we silently got into the taxi, I couldn't help but think about the cat they were leaving behind. Could Edith take care of it properly? Would she be able to love and care for it adequately? As I watched our home fade into the distance through the taxi window, I had a sudden thought and took out my phone to call someone. In hindsight, it might have been my sixth sense kicking in. Adjusting to life after the move was a bit unsettling but mostly comfortable. After all, with 2 fewer housemates, everything from cooking to laundry took half the effort, and I no longer had to worry about being considerate. I finally felt like I had regained the freedom I lost before Robert and Edith got married. One night, about a week after living like that, Edith called me. With John's approval, I answered the call. Edith's panicked voice blared through the receiver. Cheryl, what's going on? The power and gas in the house seemed to be off. It seemed she had just returned home. She was so flustered that she inadvertently switched to a video call. All I could see was the beam of a flashlight moving around in a dark room, unable to make out Edith's expression. Well, I cancelled the services, so it's no wonder they're off. What? What do you mean cancelled? Is this some kind of prank? Are you getting back at us for kicking you out? Edith, calm down. Is Robert there with you? John gently asked, and Edith's tone softened a bit as she replied. He just got home. Robert, seeing the dark house, was also in mild panic, but after they calmed down, John revealed the truth. The house has been sold, the buyer has been found, and the handover date is soon, so we cancelled all the utilities. A sale? We weren't told about this. How could you make such arrangements without telling us? I interjected in exasperation at my daughter-in-law, who was indignant and couldn't believe what her husband was saying. I informed Robert about everything, the sale, the handover date, and the progress along the way. Clearly, Robert hadn't communicated any of this to you, or perhaps in his usual manner, he hadn't even remembered hearing it. Given all the meetings of the real estate agents and potential buyers over the past few months, the house had been quite busy, but Robert and Edith were rarely home during the day, so they must have missed it all. They had plenty of chances to notice, but they missed them all. I assumed you would move out right after us. Haven't you started packing? I asked innocently. Robert and Edith immediately began arguing. It's your fault, I didn't know. I was deceived. And so on. Watching them bicker in the dark, illuminated only by a flashlight, was oddly amusing, but once they finished, they directed their anger back at us. Even so, moving forward without your housemate's consent is too much. I don't remember agreeing to this. Oh, but I did get a response from you. I asked if it was okay to sell the house, and you said, yeah, sure. In reality, it was a half-hearted response from Robert while he was watching TV, but it was still an answer. It's his fault for not paying attention. When I pointed this out, Robert was momentarily speechless, then shouted defiantly, "Fine. What should we do now?" What do you mean, what should we do? Where are we supposed to live now? You must have arranged something for us, right? John replied in a puzzled tone. Why, my eldest son, you kicked us out. Well, because even if we hadn't kicked you out, you were planning to leave anyway, right? So we're not to blame. And since you decided to sell the house, you should consider the impact on us, yeah? Rental properties pay relocation fees, right? So give us some money. You made a lot from the sale, didn't you? A rental house, huh? In that case, before paying the relocation fee, you should pay the rent for the time you stayed in that house. And we also covered your living expenses, so let's add that up. Considering a year of rent and living expenses, it comes to about $10,000. Can you pay that right now? Robert and Edith fell silent. Given Robert's financial troubles, they likely couldn't afford it. Realizing they were at a disadvantage, Robert tried to appease us. All right, we should pay you first, but we're a bit short right now. So how about we live together again? Yes, please tell us where you moved. We'll join you there. They hadn't cared about our new place when we left. I dismissed their plea. That's impossible. We can't live with a cat. Wasn't that the reason you kicked us out? We'll get rid of the cat, just let us stay. Those extremely selfish words made me truly feel sorry for the cat. It was clear that to my eldest son and his wife, the cat was nothing more than a tool to drive us out of the house. You said we ignored sacrifices for our comfort, but it's you who are willing to sacrifice anything for your convenience. The term old nuisances fits you better. When their parting words to us were thrown back at them, my daughter-in-law was left speechless and began to cry. But we no longer felt any obligation to be swayed by her tears. John and I moved into a senior living community, so you can't join us. You suggested it, remember? It's very comfortable. We'll live happily here. Don't worry about us. I ended the call. All we heard were their sobs. We never received an apology. Robert and Edith soon left the house. Without savings, they both declared bankruptcy and now live in public housing. We learned this from Sarah, our friendly neighbor, when we returned to clean the house. According to Sarah, my eldest son and his wife had a hard time packing their belongings in a house without electricity. As expected, they left the cat behind when they moved. Thankfully, I had asked Sarah to keep an eye on the cat, so it now lives with her. I offered to help find a new home for the cat, but Sarah had grown attached and decided to keep it. Surprisingly, Robert and Edith didn't divorce. Perhaps they're well matched. They might be hoping for John's inheritance, but we've chosen a high-cost senior community, so there won't be much left. John and I finally achieved a truly peaceful life together. The senior community offers many services, including a gym, karaoke, and hot springs. We enjoy 3 freshly prepared meals a day, and we can go out or travel as we please. Best of all, we have many friends here. We plan to enjoy this second phase of our lives together, making new friends and cherishing our time. You know, life throws weird stuff at you sometimes. Like that day, I accidentally launched a scoop of vanilla ice cream onto some guy's pants in the park. Let's just say my name is Isabella, 28 years old, and clumsy moments kind of follow me. I was out enjoying the sun, armed with my favorite ice cream, when I tripped right near a bench where this guy was sitting, totally absorbed in his phone. "Shoot, I'm so sorry," I blurted out as the ice cream plopped right onto his thigh. He looked up, more amused than annoyed, and then did something I didn't expect. He laughed. Guess I needed a bit more vanilla in my day anyway. His light-hearted reaction eased my embarrassment. I pulled out some napkins, trying to help clean the mess. I swear I'm not usually an ice cream bomber. "It's cool, sit down," he gestured to the space next to him. "I'm Jason, 32, and now, thanks to you, I have a sweet story about how my day got better." Grinning, I sat down. "I'm Isabella, and I guess I owe you an ice cream now." We hit it off right away. Turned out Jason worked in IT not too far from where I did my web design gigs from home. We chatted about everything from tech to the latest movies, and by the time we parted ways, we'd set up a date for the weekend. Fast forward a bit, and things between us were great. But then came the day I met his mother, Mrs. Witt. Jason had told me she was a bit traditional, but nothing prepared me for the reality. The moment I walked into their family home, there she was, sitting with a book on astrology spread out before her. "Hello, I'm Isabella," I said, reaching out to shake her hand. She looked me over, not bothering to hide her scrutiny, and then took my hand limply. "Jason tells me you're a web designer and you work from home." Her tone made it sound less like a job and more like a hobby. "Yeah, I've been doing it for a couple of years now. It's going really well." I defended my career choice, feeling my cheeks heat up. She hummed, flipping through her astrology book. "And your birthday, dear?" I told her, and she flipped through her book, her finger tracing lines of text before she clucked her tongue. "Oh, that's an unfortunate date, very challenging and astrologically incompatible with my Jason." I tried to keep my cool. "Well, we're doing just fine so far." Mrs. Wilson smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that said she knew better. "We'll see, dear. These things have a way of showing true colors in time." The whole visit was tense. Every word out of her mouth was a subtle dig at me, my job, my background, even my taste in clothes. I got the clear message. I was not what she had envisioned for Jason. So Jason, 34, and I decided to get hitched after about 3 years of that ice cream incident. Yeah, 3 years of dating, dealing with his mom's cold vibes, and just life throwing its usual curveballs. But we were solid, you know. Like nothing could really shake us. We were sitting on the couch one lazy Sunday, just chilling and watching some old comedy flicks, when Jason turned to me, his eyes all serious, which was a rare switch from his usual grin. "Isabella, I've been thinking," he started, and I felt that weird flutter in my stomach, like butterflies going nuts. "What's up?" I asked, trying to sound chill, even though my heart was doing somersaults. "I kind of want to spend the rest of my life watching bad movies with you. What do you say we make it official?" His smile was hopeful, kind of shy, which wasn't like him at all. I laughed, more out of relief because hell, I wanted this so much. Are you asking me to marry you without a ring, Jason Wilson? Damn right I am, but I promise I'll get you a ring that'll make up for this lame proposal. He was grinning now, confident as he pulled me into a hug. Planning the wedding, though. That was a circus, especially with Mrs. Wilson throwing her 2 cents in every chance she got. We were deciding on wedding invites one evening, and she was there, of course, peering over my shoulder like some kind of hawk. You're not seriously considering this design, are you? She frowned at the floral pattern Jason and I had picked out. It's far too gaudy, Mom. It's what we want. I like it. Jason jumped in, always my champion. I like it too. I added, more to stand my ground than anything else. I wasn't about to let her bulldoze every choice we made. It's your wedding. She sighed, looking anything but pleased. But remember, the invitation sets the tone for the entire event. The big day came faster than I expected. It was perfect, beautiful, even despite Mrs. Wilson's constant hovering. Jason looked dashing, and when I walked down the aisle towards him, his grin was all I needed to see. We had our ceremony outdoors under this big old oak tree. The preacher was a buddy of Jason's, someone who knew us as a couple and not just 2 individuals coming together. Do you, Isabella, take Jason to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? And do you, Jason, take Isabella to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? We exchanged rings, and when Jason slid that band onto my finger, it felt like a victory, not just over Mrs. Wilson's snide reticence or the stress of wedding planning, but over every damn obstacle that tried to throw us off our game. You may now kiss the bride, the preacher announced, and Jason didn't waste a second. When his lips met mine, cheers erupted all around us. It was like a movie, only better because it was real, and it was ours. We'd been living together for 2 years, and every step felt right, but buying our own place was a big leap. We spent weekends touring homes, debating features and balancing what we wanted with what we could actually afford. One sunny Saturday, we stumbled upon a house that ticked almost all our boxes. It was charming, had a spacious kitchen, and a big backyard. The only hiccup, it had a swimming pool. I had told Jason about my fear of water, a fear that rooted deep from an incident in my childhood where I nearly drowned. Since then, pools, even bathtubs, were a no-go for me. But Jason, bless his heart, was enamored with everything else about the house. Isabella, I know it's got a pool, but hear me out. Everything else is perfect, and we're getting it for a steal. Jason tried to reassure me as we stood looking over the property. I chewed on my lip, considering. The house really was beautiful, and the price was incredibly reasonable for what it offered. Okay, but I'm not going near that pool. Jason, you know that, right? Jason wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. Of course, babe. We'll figure it out, maybe down the line we can even fill it in or something. For now, we don't have to use it. We moved in, and the place was a dream come true. The space, the neighborhood. It felt right, but it wasn't long before Mrs. Wilson came over to see our new home, and I braced myself for her comments. She always had a way of making her disapproval known, especially about money and my job. As she walked through our new living room, her eyes scanned every detail, her lips pursed. Finally, she turned to us, her tone laced with skepticism. It's a big place, isn't it? Must have cost a pretty penny. Jason, you're sure you can handle the mortgage on this? Jason, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over. Mom, we've got it covered. Isabella and I both put in for the house. It's not just on me. I chimed in, trying to assert my contribution, tired of the insinuation that I was just riding on Jason's coattails. That's right, Mrs. Wilson. I work as well, you know. My web design job pays well, and it helped us get this place. She scoffed, clearly not buying it. Working from home on your computer all day. I don't see how that can bring in enough to afford something like this. It seems more like a hobby than a real job. The rest of her visit went by in a blur of tense smiles and changed subjects. After she left, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Jason wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close. Ignore her, Isabella. We know the truth. We're doing this together, and that's what matters. As days turned into weeks, our new house really started to feel like a home. I set up my home office, and it became my sanctuary. From there, I tackled web design projects that not only paid well, but also proved I was more than capable of contributing to our dream. Jason took care of the yard and maintained the pool, even though I never went near it. It was another sunny afternoon when the incident happened. Mrs. Wilson had decided to drop by, supposedly to bring over some of Jason's old stuff from his childhood, but I knew there'd be more to it. She always had a knack for turning a kind gesture into an interrogation. We were out in the backyard, me trying to make small talk, when her eyes fixed on the pool. Isabella, I never see you or Jason in that pool. Don't you ever swim? The question caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, deciding maybe honesty would shut it down. Actually, I'm afraid of water. Had a bad experience as a kid. Almost drowned. Haven't been comfortable around pools or large bodies of water since. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something I couldn't quite place. Was it disbelief? Disdain? Whatever it was, it didn't feel supportive. Well, that's just unusual, isn't it? A grown woman, 30 years old, afraid of a little water. She scoffed, and I felt my face heat up in embarrassment. I tried to laugh it off, but the conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. Later, I found out that it wasn't just a sour conversation, it was the start of a rumor mill. Mrs. Wilson, in her infinite wisdom, had decided to share my fear with her circle of friends and family, embellishing the story to make it sound like I was mentally unstable because of my phobia. The news came back to me through a friend who'd heard it from someone else. Isabella, is it true what they're saying, that you're too scared to even look at your own pool? Hurt and betrayed, I confronted Jason. He was furious when he heard about it. She did what? That's it, I'm talking to her. This has to stop. Jason confronted his mother, and the fallout was epic. He told her in no uncertain terms that her behavior was unacceptable. In response, Mrs. Wilson's attitude only got worse. She accused me of being manipulative, of keeping her son away from her. One afternoon, she called me directly, voice shrill and accusing. You're just trying to keep me out of the house. What are you hiding, Isabella? Meeting someone else while my son is at work? Her words were venomous, intended to wound. I was shocked. Mrs. Wilson, that's ridiculous. I would never cheat on Jason. You know that. But she was beyond reason. Oh, I know your type. You think you're so clever, but I know what's going on. I told Jason about the call, and he couldn't believe it. She said what? Now that's crazy, Isabella. You know that's not true, and I know that's not true. He laughed it off, but I was shaken. The fact that his mother would go to such lengths to paint me in a negative light was disturbing. Jason agreed and decided that we needed to set some boundaries. Visits from his mother became less frequent, and when she did come over, Jason made sure he was there to mediate. Life started feeling a bit off a few weeks after the last blow-up with Mrs. Wilson. I started noticing things, little things that wouldn't mean much to anyone else, but to me, they felt like signals in a fog. It started with a feeling of being watched. I first noticed it when I was at the grocery store. I'd be picking out vegetables and I'd get this prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like someone's eyes were glued to me. I'd turn around and sometimes catch a glimpse of someone turning away. It was probably nothing, just random shoppers, I told myself. Then it happened again at the laundromat. I was folding clothes when that same eerie feeling washed over me. I snapped my head up and saw through the front window a man standing across the street. He was just standing there, looking straight at me. I blinked, and he was gone. You're being paranoid, Isabella. I muttered to myself as I shoved the folded clothes into my bag. But the real kicker came one evening at home. Jason was late from work, and I was in the living room catching up on some web design work. I felt it again, that stare. I peeked out the window, and there he was, the same man from the laundromat across the street, barely visible in the dim streetlight, but definitely there, definitely watching. I called Jason immediately, my voice a notch higher than usual. "Jason, I think someone's been following me. I've seen him a few times now." Jason's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Isabella, love, you're probably just tired. You've been working so hard lately. Why don't you take a break?" I tried to listen to him, tried to think maybe he was right, maybe it was all in my head. I started doing more yoga, tried meditation, anything to calm down, but that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I just couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. Then it happened. I was leaving the grocery store, and there he was in the parking lot again. This time, I was ready. I quickly pulled out my phone and snapped a picture before he could walk away. I had proof now, not just jittery nerves. When I showed Jason the photo that evening, I could tell he finally saw what I was seeing. "Okay, that's not normal," he admitted. Later that night, we were walking home from a nearby restaurant when Jason suddenly grabbed the arm of someone passing by. It was him, the man from the photo. "Why are you following my wife?" Jason's voice was tense, his grip tight on the man's arm. The man looked cornered, his eyes darting around before settling on a resigned sigh. "Look, I'm a private investigator. I was hired to keep an eye on her, that's all." Jason's brow furrowed. "Hired by who?" "Your mother hired me. She wanted proof of infidelity," the investigator confessed, almost ashamed. Jason was livid. He pulled out his phone and dialed his mother right there. "Mom, what the hell are you doing, hiring someone to follow Isabella? That's it, you're out of our lives until you can behave like a decent human being." The conversation was heated, and by the end of it, Jason was shaking with anger. He apologized to me a million times on the way home. The next day, he went out and bought cameras for every corner of our property. "No one's going to invade our privacy like that again," he promised as he installed them. After everything that happened, Jason suggested we take a vacation to clear our heads. "Let's just get away from all this drama, Isabella. Just you and me somewhere peaceful," he said one evening as we sat exhausted on our couch, surrounded by the quiet of our home that suddenly felt too loud. I didn't need convincing. "Yes, let's do it. I really need a break." We decided on a little cabin up in the mountains, away from everything and everyone. It was perfect. The air was fresh, the scenery breathtaking, and most importantly, it was just us, no distractions, no unwanted intrusions. Up there, surrounded by the serene beauty of nature, I could feel all my tensions melting away. We spent our days hiking and our evenings cuddled up by the fire. I could breathe again, laugh again, and just be me without worrying about who might be watching or what they might be thinking. When we returned home, I was glowing, not just from the mountain sun, but with a new joy. I was pregnant. We discovered it a few weeks after we got back, and it filled us with a happiness that was profound yet tinged with anxiety. I didn't want anyone to know yet, especially not Mrs. Wilson. I was terrified that the stress she could bring might harm the baby, a little miracle we had waited for so long. Working from home made it easy to keep the pregnancy under wraps. I didn't go out much, and my belly, thankfully, stayed small. Unusually small, according to the doctor, but nothing to worry about, he assured us. "Every pregnancy is different," he said during one of my checkups. As my 8th month approached, and it was getting harder to hide my condition, Jason, 36, and I decided it was time to share our joy. We planned a small celebration at our house, a baby shower of sorts, inviting all our relatives. Despite everything, I felt it was right to invite Mrs. Wilson, 60. Taking a deep breath, I dialed her number, my heart thumping in my chest. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Hello." "Hi, it's Isabella. I wanted to share some news." Jason and I are expecting a baby. We're having a little get-together next week to celebrate, and we'd love for you to come." There was a pause, long enough to make me worry I'd made a mistake. Then her voice, surprisingly calm. "I'll be there." The day of the celebration arrived. Our home was filled with laughter and chatter, relatives cooing over baby clothes and guessing if it would be a boy or a girl. I mingled, my hand often resting on my small belly, feeling the gentle nudges of our unborn child. Everything was fine until my biggest nightmare came along, Mrs. Wilson. Throughout the afternoon, she kept her distance, whispering to anyone who would listen, suggesting that my pregnancy was a fabrication. "Look at her," she would say spitefully, 8 months along, and her stomach is barely showing. "She's made it all up to trap my son and get at his money." To my relief, her words didn't take root. The guests chuckled among themselves, rolling their eyes at her wild accusations. They knew her history with me, her relentless disapproval, and took her claims as just another one of her absurd stories. But Mrs. Wilson was persistent. "I'll prove it to all of you," she muttered as she stumped off, her face flushed with anger or embarrassment, maybe both, feeling a mix of dismay and a desire to finally put an end to all this nonsense. I followed her out into the courtyard near the pool. "Can we just talk?" "This isn't true. And you know it," I pleaded, my voice calm despite the churn of emotions inside me. Her face was contorted with anger. "Save it. I know what you're up to," she snapped coldly. As soon as I turned away from her, desperate to convince her, I suddenly felt a hard shove from behind. My balance lost, I stumbled forward, the edge of the pool, the water all rushing towards me in a blur of fear, terrified screams echoing. I fell into the water, the old panic from my childhood washing over me. Darkness edged my vision as I began to sink, my mind screaming for help. When I awoke, I was in a hospital bed, the sterile beep of machines filling the quiet room. Jason, 38, was there, his face pale and strained as he held my hand tightly. "How's the baby?" were the first words that tumbled from my lips, more a croak than a question. He squeezed my hand, his eyes glossy. "The doctors, they had to do an emergency delivery. He's in intensive care now," he whispered, the tremble in his voice betraying his worry. My heart sank, tears flooding my eyes as the reality set in. Our baby, our little boy, was fighting for his life in an incubator. The next morning, I woke up, still in shock, the events of the previous evening replaying in my mind like a nightmarish loop. I was in the hospital, feeling weak but driven by a need to clear up the confusion. "Jason, you need to look at the security footage from last night," I said to my husband, my voice urgent but shaky. "Your mom, she pushed me into the pool. It wasn't an accident." Jason looked bewildered, almost refusing to believe what I was saying. "Isabella, are you sure? Mom can be harsh, but to physically push you, that just doesn't sound like her." "Just please check the cameras," I insisted, my gut twisting with the fear that he might not take me seriously. He nodded slowly, pulling out his laptop to access the surveillance system we had installed at home. The tension was palpable as he scanned through the footage, his face turning from skepticism to horror as the scene played out on the screen. "God, Isabella, I'm so sorry. I can't believe she would do this," he stammered, his face pale as he turned to me, the laptop forgotten beside him. He called the police immediately. The evidence was clear and irrefutable, leading to his mother's swift arrest. Mrs. Wilson was charged, and the trial was set. Her defense was that it was all supposed to be a joke, an attempt to prove I was lying about my pregnancy. She claimed she thought my pregnancy belly was fake and expected it to come off when I hit the water, exposing my deceit in front of everyone. But the video evidence, along with witness testimonies from the party, painted a different picture. The jury didn't buy her story of a harmless prank gone wrong. She was found guilty of assault and reckless endangerment. The judge was stern as he delivered her sentence of 3 years in prison. He also ordered substantial financial compensation for the medical bills and rehabilitation costs for our son, who had been born prematurely due to the stress and trauma of the incident. Mrs. Wilson had to sell her house to cover the fines and compensation. As our son fought through his early months, undergoing numerous medical treatments and therapy to catch up in his development, the strain on us was immense. Every day was a battle filled with hospital visits, therapy sessions, and constant worry. But gradually, with relentless care and an array of medical interventions, he began to thrive. Through it all, Jason and I grew closer, our bond fortified by the trials we faced together. Our love for our son and for each other deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined. As Mrs. Wilson's release date approached, I made a decision for the safety and well-being of our family. I petitioned for and was granted a restraining order against her. It prohibited any contact with us and especially with our son. It was a tough decision but necessary. The safety of our child was our top priority, and we couldn't risk any more disturbances in our lives. One evening, as we put our son, 2 years old, to bed, Jason looked at me with a soft smile. "You know, despite everything, I feel lucky. We have each other, we have him, and we have a future." It was the end of a harrowing chapter, but, more importantly, it was the beginning of a new story for us, one filled with hope, healing, and happiness. 9 months pregnant as the new year began, I'd finally entered a stable stage of my pregnancy. I can't even remember how many times I wanted to give up after experiencing multiple miscarriages and stillbirths, and being diagnosed with a condition that would make it difficult for my child to grow up healthy. I was still able to hang in there because of my husband's unwavering support. He understood my deep desire to raise children and live in a warm, loving home. He willingly went to the hospital for tests, and after learning about my condition, he supported me wholeheartedly, taking on more work and household chores. It had been 6 years since we got married, and when we found out I was pregnant, I hugged him, overwhelmed with delight. I am Emily, and I am a mother who defied the odds. So what will we name this child? What kind of person will they be? I daydreamed about the future, lost in the joy of it all. "Let's tell your parents about the pregnancy," my husband James suggested. "It's the beginning of the year, and the timing feels right." I nodded wholeheartedly, agreeing. This child would be the first grandchild of both of our parents. I wanted to share the news with them face to face, so when the hustle and bustle of the New Year holidays calmed down, we went to my in-laws' house. My in-laws were overjoyed, hugging me with tears in their eyes. Only my husband's sister, Sarah, was absent due to work, but when I sent her a message, she was ecstatic, promising to visit soon. My mother-in-law's joy was particularly surprising. She held my hand tightly, thanking me over and over. "Thank you so much," she repeated, her voice thick with emotion. It was hard to believe this was the same woman who was usually sarcastic and had harassed me on numerous occasions. She seemed genuinely happy about my pregnancy. Seeing her like that, I couldn't help but cry. I didn't know if it was happiness or sadness or what these tears represented, but seeing her reaction brought a wave of relief. It is often said that children are a bond between parents. Maybe this child would be an opportunity for me to improve my relationship with my in-laws. With this hope blooming in my heart, I gently stroked my growing belly. On that day, my husband and I were strongly urged by my father-in-law to stay at their house. "I can't let a pregnant woman go out in this cold," he insisted. "Stay a little longer. All right, you're going to be a mother, so you have to take care of your body. Take a bath and get warm." My mother-in-law nodded in agreement, practically pushing me towards the bathroom. I refused several times, uncomfortable with taking a bath before everyone else, but they wouldn't hear of it. "My parents insist," my husband said with a gentle smile. "Please go and relax. I'll be fine waiting." In the end, I couldn't refuse their kindness. As I soaked in the steamy bathtub, I stroked my stomach, a sense of calm washing over me. Gently closing my eyes, memories of my marriage came flooding back. Our first meeting, my mother-in-law's fake smile as she murmured, "You look like a done face," when she learned I was older than her son. Her jealousy surfaced. "I don't know what you're going to do with my child, but a woman like you is not suitable for my son." From then on, she was sarcastic every time I visited. She spoiled my food, was stingy with gifts, and did a lot of other things you'd only see in TV dramas. When she found out I was having trouble getting pregnant, her cruelty intensified. She called me relentlessly, telling me she felt sorry I couldn't even have a daughter and that a barren woman should break up with her son immediately. My husband, aware of the situation, scolded her, and the situation was temporarily resolved, but her presence remained a source of immense stress. It was my husband and Sarah, his sister, who saved me from her constant attacks. They cared about me and reprimanded her for going too far. Sarah, as a woman, understood my pain. After every encounter, she would always say, "Even if it is very hard now, you will be happy. Have confidence in your choice and do your best." Her words gave me the strength to keep going. Now, even my mother-in-law seemed happy about my pregnancy. Maybe things were finally going to get better. I was lost in these pensive thoughts, enjoying the relaxing bath, when suddenly, without warning, the lights went out. "Power outage," I mumbled, peering through the frosted glass of the bathroom door. The changing area was dimly lit. Carefully, I stepped out of the bathtub, hands on the wall, holding my belly and being careful not to slip. I reached out to open the bathroom door, but before I could, I heard the sound of the sliding door opening. "Are you there?" I called out, my voice echoing in the darkness. Whoever opened the door didn't answer. I couldn't see clearly in the darkness, and a chill ran down my spine. "Are you okay?" I asked again, my voice louder this time. As if interrupting my voice, something ice-cold came crashing down from overhead. Splash. The sound of water bouncing off the floor, the sudden shock of cold against my warm skin. Someone's hand shoved me hard off my shoulder. Instinctively, I put my hand on my belly to protect my child, leaving my head vulnerable. A dull thud echoed in the darkness as my head hit the tile floor, and then everything went black. The next time I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, covered in casts and bandages, dressed in a hospital gown. I gently looked down at my stomach. It was flat. "The baby," I whispered, fear gripping my heart, memories of past miscarriages flashing before my eyes. My husband, his face pale and mouth twitching, rushed to my side. "What happened to the baby?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is the baby safe?" He took my hand, stroking it gently, as if to calm me down. "The baby is already born. Our child is fine, not injured, not sick. Our child was born prematurely, so they are in an incubator now, but you will be able to see them soon." Looking back, I realized he'd been unable to hide his fear and upset, but at the time, I was too overwhelmed with relief to notice. My child was safe. That was all that mattered. As time passed, however, questions began to surface. Why did this happen? I asked my husband, but he just murmured, "Don't worry, I'll protect you both." A few days later, Sarah visited. I thought she came to see how I was doing, but she looked stiff and was dressed in her work clothes, the uniform of a police officer. "I want you to tell me as much as you can remember about that night," she said, her face serious. I knew this was an official inquiry, but my memories were hazy. I don't remember much. Suddenly, the lights went out, and while I was lost in the darkness, someone came in and pushed me. Then I hit my head and woke up in the hospital. "Is that all? There's nothing you're hiding, is there?" "No," I insisted. "I told you everything." She frowned, her brow furrowed as she finished taking notes. "I'll come back to talk to you later," she said, walking out of the room. Almost at the same time, my husband entered. There was a police officer here. What was that about? He didn't seem to realize it was Sarah who had just left. I explained that I had told her everything I remembered about that night. As he listened, his face turned white, his hands shaking, and his forehead breaking out in a cold sweat. "Hey, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I asked, concerned by his sudden change. He paced around the hospital room, his agitation growing with every step. Finally, he stopped, took a deep breath, and looked me straight in the eye. "I'm going to take care of you, no matter what. We'll be fine." His words seemed directed more at himself than at me. A few days later, my father-in-law came to visit, his face etched with worry. Before I had a chance to greet him, he dropped to his knees, bowing deeply. "Please don't report it to the police," he pleaded. "Huh? What's that you came here to say?" My husband was furious, his voice booming with anger. My father-in-law ignored him, continuing to bow his head to me. "I'll pay you alimony, whatever you want. Please, no charges. You wouldn't press charges against someone who meant no harm, would you?" "What do you mean? The police? Why are we even talking about this?" I was completely lost. My husband, his expression pained, explained what had happened. My mother-in-law wasn't happy about my pregnancy. She hated me even more for carrying her grandchild. She wanted us to divorce, and she had asked her sister for advice on how to make it happen. Sarah caught wind of it, and in the middle had suggested a cruel plan. "Why don't you cool her body down?" She even offered to help. My mother-in-law, with her sister's cooperation, had tricked me into taking a bath, intending to cause a miscarriage. She had turned off the bathroom light, and while my eyes were still adjusting to the darkness, she poured a bucket of ice water over me. When she saw me pass out, she came up with another idea. If I had accidentally fallen, the responsibility wouldn't fall on her. She could shift the blame to me. She thought that if she forced me to divorce my husband, I wouldn't even be able to demand compensation because I had killed our child. I was speechless. I couldn't believe my mother-in-law was capable of such a thing. The realization that she harbored murderous intent towards me and her grandchild sent a chill down my spine. "I'll make my wife pay for her crimes, even if it takes her whole life," my father-in-law pleaded. "So please, just don't tell the police." His words were filled with a desire to protect himself, not an ounce of genuine remorse for what had happened to me. "I get it," I said, taking a deep breath. "I have no second thoughts. I will submit a victim report following the proper procedures." I smiled, watching as his face contorted in shock. "But it wouldn't be good for us, not for our grandchild. Think again, please." The grandmother had almost killed her grandchild. I can't stand the idea of having relatives who are so violent towards others. I stated firmly, "I will sue her to protect my child. I have to make sure she takes responsibility for her actions. For the sake of my child, right?" I tilted my head towards my husband. He nodded vigorously. "You asked me to see her because you wanted to apologize, but after all this, you care more about yourself than her. I feel sorry for our child, having such a cruel grandfather. You will not be involved with my family from now on. Just keep that in mind. Are you going to abandon your parents?" My father-in-law was making a fuss, his eyes bloodshot. But my husband's next words silenced him. "I've become a parent. I must protect my child." He jumped up and walked out of the room, leaving his father kneeling on the floor. Afterward, I explained the situation to Sarah and formally filed a police report. As a result, my mother-in-law was sentenced to prison, and her sister was also convicted of participating in the crime. My father-in-law was declared persona non grata by my husband and distanced from us. Sarah, who knew the truth, spread the story at her workplace, making her brother's life a living hell. He lost his friends and his family, and now lives a lonely life, ostracized for his actions. I was safely discharged from the hospital and was able to return home with my child to my husband's waiting arms. "I'm going to protect you both for the rest of my life," he said, bowing his head, "because that's the only way I can make amends. My husband is working hard to be a good father and a reliable and loving presence in our lives. I never thought I'd be involved in something like this, but it's in the past now. He wasn't responsible for his mother's actions. From now on, my husband and I will do our best to support our child's growth, creating a safe and loving home for our family." Let's conclude the story shortly. Despite the trauma and betrayal, I found strength in my love for my child and the unwavering support of my husband. We built a happy life together, focused on our little family. The pain of the past faded, replaced by the joy of watching our child grow. Though the scars remained, they served as a reminder of the strength I found within myself, the power of love, and the importance of protecting those most precious to me. The experience taught me that family isn't always about blood ties, but about the people who stand by you, who love and cherish you unconditionally. And in the end, that's all that truly matters. After experiencing the full journey of our story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How did the story resonate with you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay blessed. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story. It was right after I bought a house with a garden. My husband, Robert, and mother-in-law, Margaret, both grinning, declared my in-laws would move in with us. They are moving in too if you don't like it. I'll make my son divorce you. If she came, her nasty daughter would surely follow. They knew I hated this and did it anyway. The daily harassment would continue even in the new house. I shuddered at the thought. No, I don't want to live with you. What? You don't seem to understand your position. Her eyebrows shot up. She pulled out divorce papers from somewhere, and Robert's part was already signed. Her face showed she only cared about getting the house. Their plan had worked perfectly, which was terrifying. I struggled to hold back my laughter. My mother-in-law, seeing me trembling with my head down, looked triumphant. I quietly signed the divorce papers, packed my things, and left the dreaded house. I got a barrage of calls from my ex-mother-in-law on moving day. Have you realized yet? She demanded to meet and talk. That's exactly what I wanted. I would meet her and put an end to this myself. I made thorough preparations to confront them and headed to the final showdown. My name is Hannah. I work at an advertising agency. My husband, David, was introduced to me by Michael, a manager at a newspaper company, as someone in a weak position. I couldn't refuse Michael's offer. I was 31 at the time, and after 6 months of dating, I married David due to his persistence. I ended up cursing myself for making a poor decision at such a crucial moment. I think my ex-mother-in-law, Susan, intended to deceive me from the start. She seemed gentle and kind, but her attitude changed as soon as I married. She dropped the mask of a reasonable older woman and revealed her true colors as a cruel mother-in-law. Hey, Hannah, what are you doing? I told you to weed the garden after cleaning the dishes. Not a day passed without her shrill voice echoing through the house. I felt exhausted every day. I could barely manage a sigh in response. After the wedding, I agreed to live with my in-laws at David's insistence. His father had passed away, and Susan had been struggling with a leg injury for years. He begged me, saying he couldn't leave his aging mother alone in the old house. But when I got there, I saw Susan walking around just fine. She claimed educating a daughter-in-law is a mother-in-law's duty and treated me harshly every day. David was no help either. Whenever I suggested living apart, he made excuses and avoided the issue. He was always doing whatever she wanted. He never stood up for me when she scolded me. Yeah, my mom has quite a temper, huh? Stop grinning and help me. This is really hard for me. After getting married, I began to feel intense anxiety and depression. I found myself crying unexpectedly or feeling nauseous for no reason. After consulting a specialist, the doctor diagnosed me with an adjustment disorder. The thought that every day spent at my in-laws was affecting me negatively was truly unpleasant. Despite my feelings, she continued to make unreasonable demands. Don't be lazy just because it's your day off. Have you finished cleaning the room? You haven't gone shopping yet, have you? Make sure to check the discount stores before you go, please. Susan, please don't shout at me. I have a headache. I'll do the cleaning and shopping later. Don't give me that. When you're told to do something, you do it immediately. You're the daughter-in-law, aren't you? A daughter-in-law is not a maid. I wanted to retort, but her demands often involved the house itself. Clean the gutters, replace the wallpaper, fix the splinters in the pillars. The in-laws' house was very old and falling apart everywhere. It creaked whenever the wind blew. Each time, She would urge David to get a new house. "This place is a rental, you know. We're renting it cheaply from an acquaintance. Just once I want to live freely in our own home. Don't you think so, David?" "I do, but we can't afford it on my salary. A house of our own is just a dream." Susan grew frustrated with her useless son. Of course, she took out her frustration on me. Cook, clean, weed the garden, take her to the hospital. She didn't care that I was exhausted from working full-time. It was no wonder I developed an adjustment disorder. I couldn't help but think that every day, 6 months after moving in with my in-laws, a woman who made my miserable life even worse arrived. David's sister, Jessica, came back after her divorce, bringing her child with her. She said her ex kicked her out, saying he didn't want to see her face anymore. Well, it's my fault, really. I left my kid unattended and slept with my husband's senior. What kind of ethics does this woman have? Seeing my horrified expression, Jessica smiled slightly. Jessica, who looked just like Susan, acted just like her too. She refused to do any housework and made me clean her room as well. "It's only fair, right? I'm raising a child. You wouldn't understand since you haven't given birth, but it's harder than it looks, so thanks in advance for your help, Hannah." Jessica didn't work. She lazed around all day. Her childcare was half-hearted at best. She lounged on the sofa doing nothing. Her behavior was particularly bad on weekends. She'd leave her young daughter with me and go to the arcade. Jessica had some bad friends from her rebellious days and would sometimes start drinking in the afternoon with them. I wished she would at least help with some of the housework, but Jessica did absolutely nothing. She was the kind of woman who would do anything to get money for fun. This is what happened one day. Jessica handed me a drawstring bag, and when I looked inside, "These are my dad's cufflinks, ring, vintage lighters." "What? What do you expect me to do with these?" "Figure it out, sell them, and make sure you get a good price, okay?" The belongings of my late father. These were supposed to be keepsakes, yet Jessica casually told me to sell them. I felt a wave of sadness. The thought of her using the money to go to the arcade made it even worse. Unable to bring myself to do it, I explained the situation and handed the bag over to David. I don't know what he did with his father's keepsakes, and frankly, I don't want to know. When Jessica first returned, many things happened. My belongings frequently went missing after she arrived. I also discovered around that time that David was probably having an affair. A friend who worked at a different advertising agency happened to see him in town on a weekend. David was walking arm in arm with a flashy young woman. I was furious when I heard the story. I'm working hard from morning till night, even on weekends, and you're out having fun with a young woman. Unbelievable. This is cheating, right? Who is she? Tell me the truth. It's not cheating. She's just a worker from a massage parlor. And how is that any better? You shouldn't be going to such places when you're married. Jessica laughed hysterically at our argument. Susan seemed exasperated but didn't strongly scold David. According to Susan's logic, if a husband goes to such places, it's because the wife isn't devoted enough. Getting upset over something like that is embarrassing. The problem is you. If you were more devoted to David, this wouldn't happen. I don't agree, Susan. Isn't that a bit too unreasonable? This is the norm in this house. Besides, going to places like that or having an affair shows a man's prowess. A wife should forgive such things with a big heart. You useless. What was normal to them was absurd to me. Forgive visits to such places and affairs. There was no way I could do that. My frustration only grew. I couldn't just stand by any longer. Determined to change this unpleasant situation, I decided to take action. Susan and Jessica remained the same day after day. They treated me like a servant. The two of them lounged around like sea lions on the sofa or floor, raising their voices when they were hungry. "Hey, why isn't lunch ready yet? It's already noon. Stop dragging your feet, Hannah. You're so slow, it's annoying. Then why don't you make it yourselves? I've been cleaning the garden, airing out the carpets, and shopping with no time to rest." Don't talk back. Know your place as the daughter-in-law. I wasn't even allowed to voice my opinion. I was utterly fed up. I wanted a divorce immediately, but if it were that easy, I wouldn't have been struggling. David was introduced to me by Michael, a manager at a newspaper company. I was indebted to my boss, James, who also asked me not to do anything that would embarrass him. Susan knew this and often used it against me. I was completely stuck between a rock and a hard place. For a while, all I could do was endure. Then one day, David's affair became undeniable. That friend from the other agency got concrete evidence. The first stage of my preparation was complete. I needed to plan my next move. About a month later, I think it was Jessica who spread out a housing catalogue on the dinner table after dinner. From every angle, it was clear that these were items I had put in my bag. Look at this, Hannah was planning to buy a house. Wait, did you rummage through my bag? Why would you do that? Just be quiet. Oh, it's a nice house, a bit in the countryside, but still. Hey Hannah, you should have discussed something like this with me. I had my eye on a house with a garden, Susan said. It was in the countryside but looked quite good. I had already visited the place several times and met with the real estate agent. When I admitted this, the three of them became very interested. What? How far along are you in the process? Are you going to buy it? It's cheap and spacious, not bad at all. David, a man's got to be bold. Well, a house with a garden, huh? That's a big decision. If you decide to become the head of your own household, I'll support you. I'll even help a little financially. Wouldn't you like to leave here and live with Hannah in your own place? Before I could say anything, she was already encouraging David. How insincere. She had no intention of letting me go so easily. When I asked whose name the house would be under, David furrowed his brow. I'm the head of the household. It'll be in my name, obviously. Then can I proceed with the purchase? We'll buy this house and the two of us will move out, right? All right, I've decided. I'll buy the house, go ahead and move forward with the arrangements. David finally made a firm decision. Susan and Jessica both praised David for his decision, but I didn't miss it. The two of them exchanged a knowing smile. A few days later, just after purchasing the house with a garden in the countryside as planned, David and Susan, both grinning, made a unilateral announcement to me. They are moving in too. What? But you said we'd live there alone. After thinking it over, we decided to live together. You're not going to say no, are you? If you refuse, I'll make David divorce you. There it was, what a cowardly move. If Susan came, Jessica would surely follow. I shuddered at the thought of daily harassment continuing even in the new house. No way, I absolutely refuse. I have no intention of living there with you. What? You don't seem to understand your position. Her eyebrows shot up, her face red with anger, veins bulging at her temples. She pulled out divorce papers from somewhere, and David's part was already signed. Her face said she didn't care about anything as long as she got the house. If you're really going to refuse, then sign here. All right, I will. I'll sign. Let's get divorced. I've had enough. What? Hey, Hannah, are you sure about this? David, leave her. A useless woman like this is just going to make you angry. You're young. You'll find a new wife soon enough. Such harsh words. I quietly signed the divorce papers. She looked triumphant. She had no idea how I felt. My plan had worked perfectly, which was terrifying. I struggled to hold back my laughter. A few days after I moved into my new apartment, I received numerous calls from Susan. Checking my calendar, I realized it was indeed true. Today was their moving day, so she's figured it out. The incessant ringing, typical Susan. Ignoring them didn't help. They kept coming. Finally, I picked up due to her persistence. Susan didn't even greet me. She just started yelling. Hannah, how could you do this? What kind of house did you make us buy? Hello, Susan. Calm down. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Don't play dumb. This house, you knew it was defective when you bought it, didn't you? Didn't you? That's right, the house I chose had issues. The ground was unstable, often causing the land to sink. Even a new house could have doors and windows that wouldn't close properly after a few years. There were old mining tunnels nearby that caused the problems. However, the locals knew this. They built their houses on stable land. Only clueless newcomers fell into this trap. I used this problem-ridden house to trap those three. It was tough to find a reasonably priced defective house, even with the help of a real estate agent. I had also arranged for Jessica to steal the real estate catalog from my bag. I had deliberately placed my bag in an easily noticeable and stealable position. Unaware, they fell right into the trap and moved in. It was hard to keep from laughing when I signed the divorce papers. I wanted to tell them everything, but I couldn't. I played dumb. A defective house? That can't be right, there must be some mistake. What is with that attitude? So fake? Just come over here. No, honestly, I don't ever want to see you again. What? What did you say? There was no way I wanted to see that unreasonable family again. I told her I wouldn't meet them even if they paid me. Then David took over after she clicked her tongue. Hannah, please think about our situation a little. I could say the same to you, David. Did you ever think about my feelings? No, you didn't. I was always isolated. I'm sorry. I'll apologize. Just tell me where you moved to. Why would I tell you that? If you showed up, I'd have to move again. I want to cut all ties with you. The conversation went nowhere. Eventually, Susan and the others started making even more outrageous claims. They said the divorce was invalid and that we were still family. I had 2 colleagues sign as witnesses and submitted the divorce papers to the city hall. Invalid? No way. How unreasonable could they be? Anyway, just meet with us once. We need to settle this, please, Hannah. Just once, let's settle this properly. Susan and David insisted on meeting and talking. Even if I refused, they would surely call again. I had no choice. I decided to meet them and put an end to it myself. Fine. I'll meet with you once. Thank you. I owe you one. But I'll choose the time and place, okay? I couldn't risk being ambushed or followed. I needed to have the upper hand to ensure my safety. After making careful preparations, I arranged to meet the 3 of them at a cafe. I arrived at the designated cafe 20 minutes late. Susan and Jessica were already furious from being made to wait. David had a strained smile on his face as expected. They were predictable. How dare you keep your elders waiting? It's so disrespectful. I don't want to hear about respect from you. So what do you want? What's with that attitude? It's infuriating. We're stuck with a defective house because of you. Take responsibility. I told you I don't know anything about that. You decided to move in on your own, didn't you? She faltered. She couldn't deny that Susan and Jessica had willingly moved into the defective house. Their previous home was being renovated by its owner, so the only place they had to live was the defective house. If you're done, I have something to say, Susan. I will be suing you for damages. Prepare yourself. What? Damages? Suing? Why? What did I ever do to you? Tell me clearly. I showed them a copy of my medical diagnosis. The 3 of them stared at it intensely. Susan's eyes were especially wide. She probably never imagined I had been seeing a psychiatrist. You mentally tormented me to the point of developing an adjustment disorder. You never thought about how much your words hurt others, did you? It was very painful for me. I felt nauseous and cried a lot. It was really tough. That's because you're weak. You were a lousy daughter-in-law and deserved it, isn't that right? That's part of it. Calling me a lousy daughter-in-law repeatedly is slander. Slander is punishable by up to a year in prison or a fine of up to $3,000. What? That's ridiculous. What's ridiculous? Susan didn't understand the gravity of her actions. She had no idea how sinful her behavior had been, how harmful her verbal abuse was. You also did other things that are punishable by law. You threatened me multiple times, saying you'd tell James about the divorce. That's extortion. Wait, isn't that a bit exaggerated? It's not exaggerated at all. By the way, extortion carries a penalty of up to 2 years in prison or a fine of up to $3,000. I won't back down on this. All right, wait a minute. Jessica stepped in, her eyes sharper than usual. She had the look of a former delinquent, as if saying, "I won't be intimidated by your threats." What is this, scaring my mom by taking advantage of her ignorance? Do you have any proof of these so-called slanders and threats? Yes, I do. I've been recording everything. Recording? Yes, I had been recording with my phone's voice memo the entire time I lived at my ex-in-law's house. I had plenty of audio recordings. I also had data extracted specifically of Susan's abusive language. Submitting this as evidence would undoubtedly confirm the charges of slander and threats. Did you really think I'd just take it? It's not just Susan, Jessica. You're also guilty. You'll be held accountable too. What? Why me? What did I do? I showed her the screen on my phone. Jessica's face turned pale. No wonder. It showed her rummaging through my bag, the ugly scene of her searching the contents while glancing around nervously. What's that? How did you record this? Because my belongings frequently went missing after you arrived. Makeup, accessories, clothes, bags. I set up a hidden camera. This is awful. How could you do that? You're just a daughter-in-law. Unbelievable. Who's the one overstepping boundaries here? Let me inform you about the penalty for theft. Up to 10 years in prison or a fine of up to $5,000. I'll be contacting the police. Jessica's mouth opened and closed. She wanted to retort, but she couldn't. She looked completely helpless. I had kept track of all my missing items. Knowing the exact extent of the damages would make it easier for the police and lawyers to act. If I was going to do this, I would do it thoroughly. I was determined not to let these three off the hook. Finally, it was David's turn. He shrank back under my glare. If there was anyone I couldn't forgive the most, it was him. I believed a marriage was about mutual support. But David, you saw things differently, didn't you? From start to finish, you were always my enemy, weren't you? Enemy? No, I never meant that, not at all. Please believe me. Even today, I was trying to mediate as much as possible. Sure enough, with the lies. I don't need your mediation, David. David was a cowardly man. He always sided with the stronger party. He had always been with Susan and Jessica. Even now, he was trying to placate me to save himself. If he had been a slightly better man, maybe I would have stayed married. If he had said, "Let's move away and live just the two of us," I might have done that. The name of your affair partner, I believe it's Jessica. What? How did you know? I had a friend investigate. I have a friend who's good at that. I even have pictures of you and Jessica entering a hotel together. Look, here they are. Oh no, don't show them. Don't show them. David hurriedly tried to stop me from showing the screen. He didn't want his mother and sister to see his affair. But why should it matter? Their morals and ethics were already broken. They were a family of like-minded people. I put my phone and the copy of the diagnosis back in my bag. I had shown all the evidence I needed. Susan, David, and Jessica seemed defeated and drained of resistance. If they did anything careless, they'd be reported to the police. They seemed scared, but unfortunately for them, I was fully intending to consult the police regardless of their actions. I believe the police will come by eventually. Don't try to run. It'll only make things worse. And make sure you don't follow me. Understood? Hannah, don't be so cold. We were married until recently, remember? Yes, honestly, I think marrying you was a huge mistake. I feel so relieved we're not a couple anymore. If you follow me, I'll press charges for that too. So be ready. Don't wait outside my office. Don't contact me unless it's absolutely necessary. I made a few simple agreements with the three of them and left the cafe. Even after I left, they sat there looking dejected. You can't stop people from talking. The news of David's divorce quickly spread at his company. The reasons, his infidelity and mistreatment of me, spread along with it. As a result, David faced significant cold treatment at work. After all, the person who had introduced us was Michael from the affiliated newspaper company. Naturally, David lost his trust and was viewed harshly. Unable to endure the hostile environment, David eventually quit. He struggled to find new employment, and his relationships with his mother and sister became strained. David reappeared in front of me about a year after our divorce. He called out to me as I was leaving work, and I turned to see a shabby-looking man standing there. "David, I barely recognized you. I know, people say my face has changed lately." He seemed to have gone through a lot, understandable. Susan and Jessica were convicted and fined. I had claimed alimony from David. They must be struggling financially now. They still had to pay off the mortgage on the defective house, so things were tough. How are Susan and Jessica? They're alive, barely hanging on. They're both working now. They have to, or we wouldn't survive. They always say they want to go back to the old life, wanting to return to relying on my and your income. They haven't changed a bit. They're like parasites. Cutting ties with them was definitely the right decision. I thought he might retort, but he didn't. David sighed deeply and apologized to me. "I'm really sorry for everything. I deeply regret it. I was a fool. You were right. I should have always been on your side. I must have been out of my mind. Your whole family has been out of their minds from the start. Don't be so cold, please. Let's live together again. I'll cut ties with them for real this time. You're the only one for me." "Oh, really? Too bad. I'm seeing someone else now. Even if I wasn't, I'd never take you back." When I said that firmly, David collapsed to his knees. But a pity performance wouldn't work on me anymore. If I were less well-mannered, I would have spat on him right then. I left David there and went home. He never contacted me again. The information came from the real estate agent who had helped me. Susan, David and Jessica's lives have fallen apart. They blamed each other for their poverty, worsening their relationships. Neighbors heard shouting and glass breaking from their house almost every night. They berated and tormented each other, but couldn't break free. It was nothing short of hell. They are quite isolated in the community, with no one wanting to interact with them. Eventually, they will likely sell their unsellable house for next to nothing and end up homeless with just their debts. I can clearly picture the three of them huddling together, cursing each other under the cold sky someday. I'd like to see their miserable state firsthand after they've hit rock bottom. Meanwhile, I'm living a blissful life that seems almost unreal. It's thanks to my new partner, the one I mentioned to David. He's a successful salesperson at a major trading company, a mature man with a gentle nature who respects others' values, and he's also divorced like me. We're planning to have a small wedding soon. My first marriage was an incredibly bitter experience. Even now, I sometimes tear up remembering the hardships, but even during those times, I feel warmth and comfort when I lean on him. This is where I belong. I took a long detour, but I finally arrived. That's how I feel. Because of the hardships I've endured, I can now be kinder to others. I want to use my experiences to live a positive and bright life. That's how I feel these days.